She had built a whole life while he was still trying to recover from losing her, and when he finally found her again, the hardest part wasn't the past. It was deciding if love, even the real kind, was enough to survive what came next. Before we continue, double tap on your screen, click the subscribe to receive notification on our upcoming interesting videos, and drop a comment where you're watching from. She had walked into the wrong ballroom. Or maybe the right one. Naledi Osei had always found it difficult to tell the difference. The venue was the kind of place where the chandeliers cost more than her rent for a year, enormous crystal formations suspended from painted ceilings, throwing light in every direction like something that had never once considered restraint. The guests beneath them matched. Men in suits that had been tailored within the last month, women wearing the particular confidence of people who had never had to calculate the cost of anything they owned. Glasses clinked. Voices rose and fell in that warm, rehearsed way that meant everyone was performing for everyone else, and everyone knew it, and no one was going to say so. Naledi stood near the far edge of the room, close enough to the tall windows to feel the faint draft from outside. She had a glass of sparkling water she hadn't touched. She was here because her firm had sent her Meridian Consulting, mid-tier, ambitious, doing its best to grow into rooms exactly like this one, and because her senior partner had decided that the Hargrove Industry Summit was an opportunity they could not afford to miss. So Naledi was here in her best dress, the deep burgundy one with the structured shoulders that her friend Amara had once said made her look like she'd already won before the conversation started. She hoped Amara was right. She had grown up in a family that understood rooms like this without belonging to them. Her mother, Dr. Naledi Osei, had spent 3 decades working in public health, walking in and out of government buildings and donor galas and international conferences, always the smartest person in the room and almost never the one who got to say so. Her father had taught economics at a university that could not quite afford to pay him what he was worth. They had raised Naledi to be precise, to be prepared, and to know exactly what silence was worth in a room full of noise. She had learned well. The man entered the room at 11 minutes past 8, and she knew who he was before she saw his face. She knew because the room changed. Not loudly. Not the way rooms changed for politicians or celebrities, with the visible ripple of recognition, the swivel of heads. This was quieter. Conversations near the door simply adjusted. People who had been speaking with great animation seemed to become, in the space of a breath, more composed. More considered. As if the arrival of one person had raised the ambient standard of the room without anyone agreeing to it. Dorian Ashfield. She had read about him the way you read about weather systems, with the clear understanding that you were unlikely to ever be in the same place, but that knowing the patterns was still useful. Founder and majority shareholder of Ashfield Capital, the private equity firm that had, in the last decade, quietly accumulated positions in infrastructure, clean energy, and less quietly a biotech portfolio that 2 major research institutions had tried and failed to acquire. He was 38. He had never been married. He gave to causes that almost no one knew about and was photographed at events that almost everyone did. His father, Emery Ashfield, was the kind of man who appeared in the background of very important photographs and was never named in the caption, which meant he was considerably more powerful than anyone named in the caption. She knew all of this. What she had not been prepared for was the particular quality of him in person. The way his presence was not loud. The way he moved through the room with a stillness that had nothing to do with uncertainty. It was the stillness of someone who did not need to perform arrival because he had already decided he was wherever he needed to be. He was tall. Dark complexion, close-cut hair gone slightly longer than it probably should have been, a jaw with a tension in it that suggested he had spent the better part of this evening containing something. His eyes, when they moved across the room, had the quality of a scan, fast, complete, missing nothing, and they paused, briefly, on nothing in particular. Until they paused on her. She did not look away. She had learned not to do that in rooms like this. Looking away told people things about you that you hadn't agreed to tell them. He held her gaze for exactly 1 second. Then moved on. She exhaled slowly. Set her glass down on the nearest surface. Told herself that what she had just felt was simply the ordinary adrenaline response of being looked at directly by someone whose net worth had been estimated in the billions. She did not entirely believe herself. Later, 90 minutes later, after a conversation about infrastructure investment that she had somehow carried for 25 minutes with a man who kept leaning slightly forward as if she was saying something he hadn't heard before, she found herself in a corridor that existed for exactly the reason corridors at events always exist. Because every room full of people performing becomes, at some point, too much. And sometimes you need 60 seconds of silence to remember who you actually are. The corridor was pale blue, low-lit, lined with photographs of the city taken from heights she had never been to. She stood at the far end of it, breathing. "You've been calculating something all evening." She turned. He was standing 10 feet away, jacket unbuttoned, one hand in his pocket. Not leaning against the wall. Just standing the way he stood in the main room, like he had already decided where he was. "Excuse me," she said. Not in a suspicious way. He said it without apology but also without sharpness. In the way someone does when they're deciding how much of a room they're allowed to take up. She looked at him. "That's a very specific observation for someone I've never spoken to. You were by the window for 2 hours. You were in 3 conversations. You listened more than you spoke in all of them. You left before each one ended." He paused. "I wasn't watching you. I was watching the room. You just kept being the most interesting thing in it." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that exists between two people who are both deciding, at the same time, whether to say the true thing or the safe thing. She chose the true thing. "I was calculating whether this room was worth what it cost me to get here." Something in his face shifted. Not a smile. Something quieter. "And? Jury's still out," she said. He looked at her, then not the scan she had seen him use on the room, but something slower. Something that arrived with weight. And she recognized, with the particular clarity of a woman who had spent years being very honest with herself, that she was in the process of getting into something she had not planned for. She stayed anyway. What happened that night was not impulsive. It was, in its own way, one of the most considered things she had ever done. They talked for 3 hours in that corridor and then at a small table that no one else seemed to want, and by the end of it she understood that he was lonely in the specific way that people with everything are lonely, not from lack, but from the particular isolation of never being certain whether anyone in the room was responding to them or to their name. He did not ask what she did. He asked what she cared about. She answered honestly. He walked her to her car at midnight. They stood in the cool air of the parking structure, and the goodbye stretched past the point where goodbyes usually end, and she thought, "This is the part where I give him my number." And then she thought, "This is also the part where I remember who his father is." She had done her homework. She knew about Emery Ashfield. About what had happened to the architect 3 years ago, a young woman from a modest family who had, briefly, been linked to Dorian. About the series of quiet, inexplicable professional disasters that had followed. A contract dissolved. A certification delayed. A reference that never arrived. Small. Precise. Methodical. The woman had moved to another city. Naledi looked at Dorian Ashfield in the pale fluorescent light of the parking structure and felt 2 completely opposed things at once. She gave him her number. Because she was honest enough to admit she wanted to. And because she had not yet decided what to do about the rest of it. The decision made itself, 6 weeks later, in the pale quiet of a bathroom she had chosen because it was the farthest from the living room. But that is not this part of the story. This part ends in a parking structure. With 2 people standing in the space between what they wanted and what they understood, and choosing, for one night, not to close the distance. What do you think about a love that starts with this much awareness of the cost? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you've ever stayed when you knew you should go, tell us why. Morning came like an apology. Soft light, the particular gray gold of early hours in a city that never fully sleeps, coming through curtains she had not closed properly the night before. Naledi lay still for a long time before she allowed herself to think. She had learned to do that, to give the body time before the mind arrived with all its questions. He was asleep beside her. One arm extended, shoulder turned slightly toward her, breathing with the unhurried rhythm of someone who, for this moment at least, was not carrying anything. She had expected that the sight of him in the ordinary daylight would undo some of what the evening had built. That the morning would bring with it the particular clarity that often arrived after decisions made in low light. It did not. If anything, seeing him like this unguarded, the careful composure he carried in public gone entirely, did something she had not braced for. Made him more real. Made him more the thing she had already, somewhere in herself, started to feel. She lay very still. She did not move toward him, and she did not move away. She simply allowed herself, for 5 full minutes, to be a person who felt what she felt without immediately arguing with it. Then she got up. She dressed with the quiet precision of someone who has already decided and is simply completing the motion. Not quickly rushing would have been its own kind of statement. Just steadily. Deliberately. She picked up her earrings from the bedside table where she had set them the night before, and paused for a moment with them in her hand, because the sight of them there, the particular smallness of that detail, the intimacy of it, made something in her chest tighten. She did not wake him. She looked at him once more from the doorway. Because she was the kind of person who believed in doing difficult things with your eyes open rather than looking away from them. And then she left. Not because last night had been a mistake. She was clear about that, walking down the quiet street toward the tube station, hands in her coat pockets, the morning cool against her face. She was not leaving because she regretted it. She was leaving because she understood it. Because she had lain in that half-awake space before full consciousness and let herself imagine the shape of a future that included Dorian Ashfield, and the shape had been, for exactly 30 seconds, quietly, dangerously beautiful. And then she had remembered the architect. She bought a coffee from a cart near the station, standing in the thin morning light with the cup warming both hands. She thought about what it had cost that woman to love someone in his orbit. The contracts. The delays. The quiet, systematic dismantling of a professional life by a man who never raised his voice, never made a direct threat, and left absolutely nothing that could be traced back to him. She thought about her own family. Her mother's practice, 30 years of work, relationships built carefully, a reputation earned without compromise. Her father's research, the grants he was applying for, the students who depended on the recommendations he wrote. She thought about what a man like Emery Ashfield could do to any of it. Without urgency. Without announcement. Simply because he had decided to. She finished the coffee and stood there for a moment longer. Then she went home. She did not call Dorian. He called her, once, 3 days later, and she looked at the name on the screen for 4 full rings and did not answer. He did not call again. Which told her something: either he understood, or he was the kind of man who moved on without protest, and she was not certain which of those things hurt more. She told herself it was the right choice. She told herself that for 6 weeks. And then the test changed everything, and the story changed shape, and the choice she had already made became something larger and harder and more permanent than she had been prepared for. 2 lines. The second one faint, but there. She sat on the floor of her bathroom with her back against the wall for a long time. Not crying. She had always found that the biggest moments of her life arrived without tears, that she cried at small things, films, songs, the particular quality of light on a certain afternoon, but that the enormous things produced in her a strange, suspended stillness, as if the body understood that crying would be a kind of release, and release was not what was needed. What was needed was thinking. She thought for 3 hours. Then she made an appointment. Certainty, when it arrived with a detail she had not considered. The doctor was kind, thorough, and delivered information the way good doctors do, clearly, without drama, with space for the listener to absorb. Naledi absorbed it, sitting very upright in a blue plastic chair, her handbag on her lap, her face very still. Twins. She drove home in silence with the radio off. She did not stop to think about what it meant for the practical architecture of her life: the flat, the work travel, the fact that she had £200 in savings and a job that did not offer maternity beyond the statutory minimum. All of that was real and would require real solutions. But right now, in the car, none of it arrived. What arrived instead was something she had no name for. Something that sat below the logic of consequences and the machinery of plans. 2. She sat in the car outside her flat for 40 minutes. She thought about calling Dorian. She let the thought exist fully before she answered it. She imagined the call, the sentence, the silence on the other end of it. She imagined what came after. What his father's people would do with the information. The legal processes, the documentation, the way two small lives would immediately become a negotiation point in a world built from leverage. She thought about the architect. She made her decision in the car, in the quiet, with no one watching. And when she finally went inside, she moved with the particular steadiness of a person who has put their hands around something enormous and decided to carry it. She did not call Dorian Ashfield. She called her mother instead. Said she was fine. Said work was interesting. Said she had been thinking about a change of city for a project, for something new. Her mother listened in the way her mother always listened, which was to say completely, and said, quietly, at the end, "You sound like you've already decided." "I think I have," Naledi said. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then, "Will you be safe?" "Yes," Naledi said. And meant it. 3 weeks later, she left. The city she moved to was smaller. Not quiet. No city is ever truly quiet, but smaller in the way that changes how you fit into it. Fewer degrees of separation. The same faces at the market on Saturday, the same coffee shop owner who remembered your order by the third visit, the particular texture of a place where people noticed things and said so. Naledi had chosen it deliberately. She needed a place where being a stranger would not last long, but where no one had any reason to look for her. She found work within a fortnight. A consulting role at a regional development firm, smaller than Meridian, better funded than she had expected, with a manager named Philippa who interviewed her for 40 minutes and offered her the job before she had finished her water. She found a flat on the second floor of a converted Victorian terrace, with high ceilings and a garden she shared with the neighbor below, a retired schoolteacher called Mr. Okafor who grew tomatoes and brought them upstairs without announcement. She built a life. That is the only accurate way to say it. Not that it happened, not that it assembled itself around her, but that she built it, deliberately and with effort, the same way you build anything that needs to last. Brick by brick. Decision by decision. With the particular determination of a woman who has decided that the story will be told on her terms. The pregnancy was not easy. The first trimester was the kind that made her understand why people spoke about it afterward with a mixture of pride and horror, the exhaustion that arrived not like tiredness but like a weight distributed evenly across every cell, the nausea that had no reliable schedule and no reliable remedy. She worked through it. She did not tell her colleagues until she had to. She managed the school run of her own daily needs with a precision that left no room for self-pity, because self-pity required space and she did not have any. She called her mother every Sunday. Never told her everything. Told her enough that her mother could feel the shape of it and decide not to push. The twins arrived in April, in a hospital that smelled of clean floors and something floral she never identified, in a labor that lasted 14 hours and felt, at several points, completely impossible, and at others, like the most clarifying experience of her life. Zoe came first. She arrived the way she would spend the next 6 years, arriving absolutely certain of her own importance, already making herself known before anyone had finished being ready for her. She was loud from the first breath. Her eyes, when they opened in those first seconds, were dark and wide and completely unafraid, and the nurse said, "Oh, this one has opinions, and Naledi, exhausted and shaking and laughing and crying all at once, said, yes. She does. Eli came 4 minutes later. He arrived quietly. He did not announce himself. He simply appeared, eyes closed, small hands curled, his breathing steady and unhurried, as if he had assessed the situation and found it acceptable. He was placed on her chest, and he went still, and she felt his weight against her, and something in her that had been suspended since a parking structure at midnight the previous summer simply settled. She lay in that hospital bed with her children on her chest, and she did not think about Dorian Ashfield. She thought about nothing except the weight and warmth of what was here. What was real? What was hers? The years that followed were not easy. She would not pretend they were, not even in the privacy of her own telling of them. There were months where the math of childcare and rent and groceries and the particular expense of raising 2 children who seemed to eat in proportion to their curiosity required a kind of creative budgeting that left no room for error. There were evenings when both children were finally asleep and she sat at the kitchen table in the silence and simply felt the weight of everything she was managing alone, the full measure of it pressing down without warning, and she would sit with it for exactly 5 minutes and then get up and prepare for tomorrow. There were also other evenings. Evenings when Zoe climbed into her lap and asked her to explain something and then, before she had finished, climbed back down and went to tell Eli what she had learned, slightly wrong but with absolute conviction. Evenings when Eli sat beside her at the kitchen table working on something in a notebook with the focused silence of a person who understood that concentration was a form of respect. Evenings when both of them, in some small unremarkable moment, looked at her with something so open and complete that she felt it land in her chest like an answered question. She loved them with the kind of love that has no suitable description. Not the love that is warm and ambient and decorates the edges of things, the love that is structural. The love that is the foundation the whole thing stands on. She raised them with intention. She wanted them to know who they were before the world told them who to be. She wanted Zoe to know that her certainty was not arrogance, it was inheritance. She wanted Eli to know that his stillness was not absence, it was presence, of the rarest and most valuable kind. She told them these things directly, because she had learned that children absorb everything but respond best to what is said plainly. Occasionally, in the quiet way that unavoidable things arrive, she thought about him. Not often. She was not the kind of person who let the unresolvable take up permanent residence. But sometimes Eli would go still and watchful in a way that was entirely his own and also entirely, unmistakably familiar. Sometimes Zoe would hold someone's gaze a beat longer than expected and refuse to be the first to look away, and Naledi would feel something pass through her that she could not name. She filed those moments. Moved on. There was always something next. Dorian Ashfield, meanwhile, had done what men like Dorian Ashfield do. He worked. He expanded. He acquired. He attended the right events, was photographed with the right people, made the right investments in the right sectors at the right times. His father appeared in the background of those photographs, unnamed and satisfied. Women entered his life with the regularity and the approximate permanence of visiting executives. Present for a season, useful for a purpose, gone without significant disruption. He was never unkind to any of them. He simply could not be fully present for any of them. There was a room in him, sealed since a certain morning 6 years ago, that simply would not open. He told himself he had let it go. He had not let it go. He had simply stopped looking directly at it. Which, he was beginning to understand, is not the same thing at all. The summit was the kind of thing his team scheduled and his calendar accepted and his presence confirmed before he had any particular feelings about it one way or another. 10 days. A regional investment summit, infrastructure, sustainable development, 3 panels he was expected to join, 1 keynote he had agreed to deliver before he fully read the brief. His family kept a private residence in the city, maintained year-round, available for exactly these occasions. His assistant described the neighborhood as quiet. He had not paid much attention to that description. He paid attention to it now. The house was large and impeccably kept and sat on a street that was, genuinely, quiet. Not the quiet of absence, the quiet of a neighborhood that had settled into itself, where people walked dogs at dusk and children played in front gardens with the complete confidence of people who had never been told they couldn't. He sat on the back terrace on his first evening and stared at nothing for 20 minutes. Then he realized what he was doing and tried to think of the last time he had done it. He could not. He was still adjusting to that fact on the third afternoon when the ball came over the fence. It was a standard red and white football, slightly scuffed, traveling in a high, confident arc that suggested it had been kicked with considerable force by someone who had either misjudged the distance or simply not considered the fence a meaningful obstacle. It landed 10 feet from where he was sitting with a clean thud on the grass. He looked at it. Then he looked up, because a sound was coming from the fence. A rhythmic, purposeful sound that turned out to be the sound of someone climbing it. She came over the top with total, unhesitating confidence. Small, 6 years old at most, braids swinging, wearing a yellow t-shirt with something written on it in paint that she had probably done herself. She gripped the top post, swung one leg over, reached for the inside ledge, and her foot slipped on the smooth painted wood. He was already moving. He crossed the distance without thinking, without decision, simply moving because something in him had registered the trajectory before his mind caught up, and he caught her, the full small weight of her hitting his arms and chest as she came loose, the two of them landing in an ungainly grip that was more collision than catch but accomplished the essential purpose. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she looked up at him. He had expected fear. Tears, maybe. The aftermath of a fright. What he received instead was a look of pure, frank assessment, the kind of look that children give before they have learned to disguise what they are actually thinking. She looked at him the way a very senior colleague might look at someone who had just produced an unexpectedly strong piece of work, acknowledging the result while reserving judgment on the character. "That was good," she said. He stared at her. He was completely at a loss. "Are you hurt?" She considered this with what appeared to be genuine thoroughness. "No." She looked around the garden with the open curiosity of someone who had always planned to see it sooner or later and was simply noting what she had found. "Your garden is smaller than ours." He set her down. She smoothed her t-shirt with enormous dignity, then spotted the bowl of individually wrapped mints on the table behind him, a summit reception leftover he had brought home without purpose. And her attention relocated with the precision of a compass finding north. "Are those yours?" she asked. It was phrased as a question. The phrasing was a formality. "Not particularly," he said. She nodded. "Good." And helped herself to 2. A face appeared over the fence. A boy, the same age, the same features arranged differently, quieter in every visible frequency. He took in his sister. He took in the stranger. He processed this information with great rapidity and then dropped back to the ground. "That's my brother Eli," the girl said, already unwrapping her second mint. "He's gone to get our mum. She'll be fast." "Should I be worried?" Dorian asked. She gave this careful thought. "Probably not. But she'll have things to say." He was still constructing a response to this when the gate clicked open and a woman came through it. She was moving quickly, purposefully, with the particular energy of a parent who has been frightened and is now converting the fright into forward motion. She had not yet looked up, she was looking at her daughter, scanning for damage, doing the rapid silent inventory of someone who has learned to assess fast. Her daughter was upright, unharmed, holding sweets, and entirely unbothered, and the relief that crossed the woman's face was immediate and physical, visible in the way she exhaled. Then she looked up. Dorian went very still. He knew her face. That was the first thing, arrived before any other thought, the simple, undeniable recognition of a face that had been living in a part of him he had not let himself visit. And then the recognition expanded and he understood that he was not remembering her from a photograph, or from a professional encounter he had misplaced, or from any of the ordinary categories of recognition. He was remembering her from a corridor, and a table, and a parking structure at midnight. From the morning he had woken up alone. She had gone perfectly still. The two of them stood 4 feet apart in the thin afternoon light, and the garden was very quiet, and the children watched, and nothing was said. He found his voice first, because someone had to. Hello. It was, in the circumstances, deeply inadequate. But it was what he had. Naledi Osei looked at him the way you look at something you had told yourself you were prepared for, and discovered you were not, quite. Then she looked at her daughter. Zoe, she said, with remarkable steadiness, come here. Zoe came, mint still in hand, completely untroubled by whatever was happening between the adults. Eli appeared at his mother's side, quiet and close, and put his hand into hers. Naledi crouched. She checked her daughter with swift, practiced hands, looked her over, satisfied herself. Then she stood. She did not look at Dorian immediately. She looked at the fence. Then the garden. Then, finally, him. She's fine, she said. I know. I caught her. A silence. Thank you. Said cleanly, without inflection. Of course. She took both children's hands. Turned toward the gate. Naledi, he said. She stopped. Her back was to him. He watched her shoulders and the particular quality of her stillness, and he understood that she had heard her name in his voice and had not been ready for it, and that this mattered. She did not turn around. She walked her children through the gate and closed it behind her, and he stood in the garden and watched it close and understood that the next 10 days had just become a great deal more complicated than he had planned. The ball came over the fence again the next morning. And the morning after that. By the 4th day, it was no longer about the ball. Zoe had decided in the private, unilateral way that Zoe decided everything that the man on the other side of the fence was interesting, and that interesting things deserved her attention. She appeared at the gate each afternoon with the authority of a visiting official and knocked 3 times. Sharp, precise, unhurried. Dorian was beginning, against his better judgment, to expect it. She talked. About everything, in the way that children talk when they have decided someone is worth talking to without editing, without strategy, without the self-consciousness that adults develop like scar tissue over their real voices. She told him about her teacher, who was mostly fair but wrong about fractions. She told him about the dog 3 doors down that she was working on befriending, and the progress she had made. She told him that she intended to be an engineer when she grew up, specifically the kind that built bridges, because bridges were the most honest structure. They existed entirely to connect things that were otherwise separate. He listened to all of it. Entirely. Not in the way of someone waiting politely for the moment they can speak, but with the genuine attention of a person to whom this was, inexplicably, the most interesting conversation they had been in for years. Eli said less, but Eli's less meant more. He sat at the edge of whatever space they occupied, the gate, the terrace steps, the corner of the small bench near the fence, and watched with those careful, measuring eyes. He asked 1 or 2 questions per visit, always precise, always about something he had clearly been thinking about before he asked. The mechanics of how buildings stayed upright. Why certain birds only sang in the morning. Whether Dorian thought it was possible to miss a person you had never actually met. That last one landed differently than the others. Why do you ask? Dorian said. Eli looked at him with the straight, unflinching gaze of a child who does not yet understand social deflection. Because sometimes Mom looks like she's thinking about someone who isn't here. And I don't know who it is. Dorian was quiet for a moment. Have you asked her? She says she's just thinking. Eli looked out at the garden. But thinking isn't the same as missing someone. No, Dorian thought. It isn't. He noticed things. He noticed them the way he noticed everything in the peripheral, accumulating way of someone whose attention, however directed elsewhere, catches details without permission. The way Zoe moved through the world with an absolute certainty that was not arrogance, but something more specific. The certainty of a child who has been told, consistently and without qualification, that she is worth exactly the space she takes up. The way Eli processed things, the stillness before speech, the preference for observation over participation, the quality of presence that made you feel, when he was paying attention to you, that you were being understood rather than simply seen. These things arrived. He filed them. And then, one afternoon, the thing he had been filing without understanding what it was became impossible to file. It was the way Eli tilted his head when he was thinking. A specific angle, chin slightly down, eyes up and to the left, a stillness in the jaw. Dorian had seen it 3 times before without identifying it, the way you see a word you don't know and pass over it. On the 4th time, it hit him. He had seen that gesture in a mirror. He sat with that for a very long time. He sat with it that afternoon on the terrace after the children had gone. He sat with it that evening with a glass of something he didn't drink. He sat with it the way you sit with something when you are not yet ready to look at it directly, circling it, checking its dimensions from a safe distance. Then he looked at it directly. The timeline. The night. The morning he had woken up alone. The 6 years. The 2 children who had his eyes in their mother's face. He was a father. He sat with that for 3 hours on the back terrace with the lights off. He was not a man accustomed to being unprepared, to arriving at a situation without a position, without having read the brief, without knowing the shape of what he was walking into. His entire professional life had been built on the discipline of never being caught without an answer. He had nothing. No position. No answer. Just the enormous, silent, completely destabilizing fact of it. In the morning, Naledi came to his door. He had wondered if she would, or whether she would simply wait for him to come to her, or whether she would take the children somewhere until his 10 days were up and the decision would make itself. He had not decided what to say. He had not slept. She was standing on his doorstep at 8 in the morning, and she looked like someone who had also not slept, and also like someone who had decided to come before the not sleeping convinced her not to. "You know," she said. Not a question. "I think so," he said. "Yes." She nodded. She looked at him for a long moment. "I need to know one thing," she said, "before this becomes a conversation. Did you know that day? When you first saw me? Did you already know?" "No," he said. Another nod. She looked down for a moment, and he saw something pass across her face, something between relief and grief, the two traveling so close together they were almost indistinguishable. "Okay," she said. "Come in," he said. She looked at him. She looked at the door. She stepped inside. What do you think was going through Naledi's mind on that walk to his door? Comment below, and if this story is hitting close to home, share it with someone who needs to hear it. The conversation lasted 4 hours. It was not easy and it was not clean and it was not the kind of conversation that arrived at conclusions. It was the kind that cleared ground. She told him about the parking structure. About the architect. About the decision made in a car outside a flat in the city she had lived in before. She told him without apology and without softening, because she had decided before she knocked on his door that she would not manage his response. She would simply tell the truth and let him do what he did with it. He listened without interrupting. He was, she had always understood this about him, an exceptional listener. She had felt it in the corridor at the summit, the quality of his attention, the way it was not passive but active, not waiting but receiving. He listened now with that same quality, and she watched him take in what she was saying and watched the weight of it land without deflection. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'm not my father." "I know," she said. "Then why?" "Because knowing you're not him and knowing what his world does to people who love their way into it are 2 different things." She looked at him steadily. "Your stepbrother wasn't his father either. He was gentle. He loved that woman genuinely. It didn't protect her from a single thing. He had no answer for that. She had not expected one. "I'm not asking you to answer it now," she said. "I'm just telling you why I did what I did. So you understand it wasn't because I didn't." She stopped. "Didn't what?" he said quietly. She looked away. "Because I didn't feel anything. Because I want you to understand the choice was not made from absence." The silence that followed was different from the silences before it. Fuller. More loaded with the weight of things unsaid that were, nonetheless, understood. They did not resolve anything that day. But a door had been opened that had not been opened before, and they both understood that some part of the situation had changed, and that what came next would require them to decide, separately and then together, what to do with the change. What came next was Zoe. Zoe had decided, again, privately and unilaterally, that dinner was a reasonable expectation. She made this known on the fifth evening by appearing at the fence gate at 6:45 and announcing that her mum made enough food and he should come. Naledi, standing at the stove, heard this from inside the house and said her daughter's name in a tone that meant, "That is not your decision to make." Zoe heard this tone and decided it meant, "That is not your decision to make unless you make it anyway." Dorian appeared at the back door with a look on his face that was, Naledi thought with reluctant precision, the exact look of a man who is trying not to smile. "I was invited," he said. "By a 6-year-old. She was very convincing." She looked at him. She looked at Zoe, who was watching from the hallway with the expression of someone who knows they have done a good thing even if the adults have not caught up yet. She looked at Eli, who had appeared silently beside his sister and given a small, quiet nod. She stepped back from the door. He sat at a table that had been set for 3, at a stool that Zoe found in the spare room and dragged to the table with great ceremony. He ate the food she had made without comment on its excellence, which was the right thing to do. Making a performance of the food would have been a kind of condescension, an acknowledgement of the gap between his world and this one, and he appeared to understand this. He simply ate. He engaged with Zoe's running commentary on the events of the day. He responded to Eli's considered observations about the documentary they had watched after school with the seriousness those observations deserved. He washed up after, without being asked, which Naledi noticed and did not comment on. He came back the next evening. And the one after. She did not invite him and she did not invite him. She held herself at a distance that was not quite refusal and not quite welcome, watching carefully, telling herself she was gathering information. This was not entirely untrue. But it was not entirely complete either. What she was actually doing was watching him be something she had not let herself believe he could be. He was present. Not in the performed, look-at-me-being-present way of people who want credit for showing up. Present in the way that means your attention is here, in this room, on these people, and the rest of it, the phone, the schedule, the enormous machinery of a life built from responsibility and expectation, waits. She watched him turn his phone off during a card game because Eli had been in the middle of a sentence. She watched him lose an argument to Zoe about the structural properties of suspension bridges and lose it with what appeared to be genuine intellectual engagement rather than patronizing concession. She watched him sit for 40 minutes on the back steps while Eli explained, in careful detail, the migratory patterns of a bird he had been tracking, and she watched the quality of his attention never waver. She watched all of this and felt the architecture of what she had built over 6 years begin, quietly and without her permission, to shift. She did not let herself call it hope. Not yet. Because hope was the thing she was most afraid of. Not because she was a pessimist, she was not. But because she had 2 children who were already, visibly, attaching to this man, and she was not prepared for what it would cost them if she allowed hope and it turned out to be misplaced. But she felt it. In the evenings, when the children were asleep and the house was quiet, she felt it. The pull of what was possible. The way his presence had changed the texture of these days. The specific, quiet warmth of not being alone in the management of things. She sat with it. She did not act on it. She was very good at waiting. She was less good at it than she had been 6 weeks ago. It happened on a Tuesday evening, which is the kind of detail that reveals everything about how the worst moments arrive, not on marked days, not in prepared circumstances, but on ordinary evenings when the children are in bed and the dishes are done and there is simply no longer anything to hide behind. They had been talking for an hour. Not arguing, not yet. The particular kind of conversation that is not quite an argument but has all the tension of one, a back and forth in which everything that is said is true and nothing being said is solving anything. Naledi had been saying that she needed time. That the children were already attached in ways she had not anticipated and could not unwind, and that the attachment worried her because she could not see the shape of what came after his 10 days. That she would not build something in front of her children that had no ending she could hold with confidence. Dorian had been saying, with considerable patience, that he was not going anywhere. That the 10 days were a container that no longer described the situation. That whatever this was, and he was aware it was many things and he was not going to name them all tonight, but whatever this was, he was not treating it as a visit. She had looked at him and said, "You can't make that promise." "Why not?" "Because your life is elsewhere. Because in 3 days you go back to it. Because your father doesn't know any of this yet, and when he does." "My father," he said, "has no authority over." "Dorian." She said his name quietly but with a precision that stopped him. "I have watched what your family does to people who love someone they've decided is inconvenient. I have spent 6 years building a life that is invisible to that. I am not going to walk back into the radius of it and trust that this time will be different because you have decided you don't care about their approval. I'm telling you it's different. People who love Kyle's girlfriend also believed it was different." Silence. He stood. He moved to the window. He was quiet for a long time, and she could see the tension in his shoulders, the thing that happened when his control was at its limit and he was working to keep it in place, and she understood that he was frightened. Not of her. Of losing this. Of the particular, hollow feeling of a door closing on something he had not been ready to have and was not ready to lose. She understood it because she felt it too. And then he said the word. Custody. He said it the way you grab at something when you're falling, not as a threat, not with the intent of someone who has planned it, but with the desperation of someone who has run out of everything else. As if the word itself could be an anchor. As if saying it could make her stay in the room long enough to hear the rest. She went very still. The word sat between them in the quiet like something that had been dropped and could not be put back. She looked at him for a long moment. Not with fury. She had expected fury and then realized she did not have it. What she had was something colder and more precise. Clarity. The particular clarity of a person who has just received a piece of information they did not want but cannot unreceive. "You don't want that," she said. "Naledi." "Look at me," she said, still quietly. "Look at me and tell me honestly that what you just said represents what you want." He looked at her. He could not say it. Because she was right and they both knew it, and the knowing was worse somehow than the word itself. "I know," she said. "I know it wasn't a real threat. I know it came from desperation. But," she paused. She was choosing the words carefully. "Not to hurt him. To be precise. You just proved something to me. You proved that when people in your family's position feel like they're losing control of something, they reach for leverage. Even when they don't mean to. Even when it goes against everything they believe about themselves. That's not fair." "It is fair," she said. "It's painful, and it's true, and it's fair." Her voice did not waver. "You are not your father. I have never believed you were your father. But you are still inside the same machinery. And when you felt the ground move, the thing you reached for was the thing that machinery gives you." He was silent. She looked at him for a long time. "I want you to think about one thing," she said. "Not tonight. Not now. Just think about it." She met his eyes. "Can you leave it?" All of it. The name, the position, the expectation. Your father's world. Can you walk away from everything you were built to be and choose a life that looks like this one, not one that absorbs this one, but one that is this one? He opened his mouth. Don't answer now, she said. Because the right answer and the true answer might not be the same thing tonight. And I have spent 6 years choosing truth over the easy version of things. I need you to do the same. She walked past him, through the kitchen, and up the stairs. He stood in her kitchen alone in the quiet, and heard the house settle around him, and felt, with a completeness he had not expected, the full weight of what he had said and what it might have cost him. He let himself out. He walked back to his house through the garden in the dark. He sat on the terrace and did not move for a very long time. Inside his chest, something that had been locked for 6 years was open now. The question was whether he had broken it open or unlocked it. He was not yet sure. He did not sleep. He sat on the terrace until the early hours, and then he sat inside at the kitchen table, and then he stood at the window and watched the dark outside become the particular kind of almost dark that precedes dawn. He made coffee he did not drink. He looked at his phone and then set it down. He thought about his father. Not with hostility. That was the thing that surprised him. He had always assumed that if he ever looked at it directly, if he ever held his father's influence up to the light and examined what it had cost, the result would be anger. What arrived instead was something more complicated. A sadness with no clean edges. Because Emery Ashfield had not built his world from cruelty. He had built it from fear. The fear of loss, of dilution, of anything that could not be controlled. He had confused protection with control so long ago that the two had fused into one thing, and the thing he was protecting his family from, more than anything else, was the ordinary human vulnerability of loving people who could not be managed. Dorian had absorbed this. He had not decided to. You do not decide to absorb the architecture of the world you grow up in. It simply becomes the shape of your interior. He thought about Naledi. About the corridor at the summit, which had felt, even then, like stepping into something real after a very long time of performing realness. About the morning he had reached for her and found her gone. About the particular quality of the absence that had followed, not dramatic, not acute, but persistent. The kind that does not announce itself but is simply always there, like a splinter too small to see but too constant to forget. He thought about Zoe. About the specific, absolute confidence of her. About Eli's question, can you miss someone you've never met, and about everything that question contained. He thought about his phone. About the meeting he had missed. About the fact that he had turned it over without hesitation when Eli was talking, and that the hesitation he had felt about it was not regret. It was surprise at the absence of regret. He thought about what Naledi had asked him. Can you leave it? He sat with the question honestly, the way she had asked him to. He sat with the version of it that was not about what he wanted to say but about what was true. And what was true was this: the world he had been built inside had never, not once, felt like his. He had been useful to it. He had been good at it. He had, in the way of someone who is skilled at a thing, derived a certain satisfaction from the skill. But he had never, not for a single unguarded moment, felt at home in it. The moments that had felt like home, the only ones, were the ones he could count on 2 hands. A corridor. A conversation that lasted until midnight. A kitchen table set for 3 with a stool pulled up to make room. An afternoon on back garden steps while a boy explained the routes of migratory birds. He could leave it. Not easily. Not without cost. The legal complexities alone were considerable, his equity positions, his board seats, the relationships that had taken years to build. Leaving his father's world was not a single decision but 100 decisions, spread across months of practical consequence. It would require lawyers and restructuring and the particular, grinding difficulty of disentangling a life from the institutional machinery that had always supported it. But he could do it. He was clear about that, standing at the window at 5 in the morning with the first light beginning at the edge of the sky. He could do it because the alternative was returning to a life in which everything he had built was perfect and correct and entirely hollow, and in which the only room that had ever felt real in him stayed locked. He went back to the terrace. He sat for a while longer. Then he picked up his phone and called his lawyer. "I need you to start a process," he said, when she answered. "It's significant. I'll explain it fully tomorrow. But I need you to know tonight that it's happening." His lawyer, who had worked for him for 11 years and had learned to take his middle-of-the-night calls with equanimity, said, "All right. Is this about the summit deal?" "No," he said. "It's personal." He paused. "It's about everything." He set the phone down. He sat with the decision for a few minutes, checking it for the wobble that decisions made in the dark sometimes had. There was no wobble. There was only the particular steadiness of something that has been true for a long time and has finally been acknowledged. Then he went next door. It was 6:45 in the morning. The street was quiet. He rang the bell and waited. Naledi opened the door. She was already awake. She had clearly also not slept. She was wearing a gray sweater and had a mug of tea in one hand, and she looked at him with the careful, guarded expression of someone who has been through enough to know that being moved is different from being safe. "Can I come in?" he said. She looked at him for a moment. She looked at his eyes, which she had always been very good at reading. Something in what she found there shifted her expression slightly, not warm, not yet, but open. The difference between a wall and a door. She stepped back. He sat across from her at the kitchen table and told her what he had decided and why. He told it without drama and without performance, in the plain and direct way she had always deserved to be spoken to. He told her he understood that deciding and doing were different things, and that she had no obligation to trust the decision before she saw the evidence of it. He told her that he was going to begin the process today, that his lawyer already knew, and that he understood if she needed to see it before she believed it. He told her he had been sitting with her question all night and that the answer was yes. "And your father?" she said. "My father is going to have opinions," he said. "He will have them loudly, and he will have them at length, and then he will have to live with what I've decided. He will try to." "Yes. He will." He was quiet for a moment. "But he can't do to me what he does to people who are outside the family. And what he might try to do to you or the children," he stopped. "I need you to believe that I will stand in front of that. Not because I want to be dramatic about it. Because they are my children, and you are." He stopped again, and this time the stop had a different quality. Something more careful. More honest. "Because you are the only person I have ever been in a room with and felt like myself." Naledi looked at him. She looked at him for a long time. She looked the way she looked at things when she was being completely honest with herself, not searching for what she wanted to see, but genuinely looking at what was there. "I need to think," she said. "Take as long as you need," he said. "It might be days." "Take days." She looked down at her tea. Then up at him. "Why?" she said. It was a real question. Not rhetorical. "Why is this worth everything you're talking about giving up?" He thought about it. He answered honestly. "Because everything I would be giving up is things. And because the last 6 years of having what I was supposed to want, felt like a long rehearsal for a life I didn't choose." He looked at her. "You asked me once whether I was worth the cost of you staying. You didn't ask it in words. But that was what the corridor was. And the answer I gave then was to let you leave without a word." He paused. "I'm not doing that again." She was quiet. "Think," he said. "Take days. I'll be here." He left her with her tea and the morning light and the sound of 2 small lives beginning to stir upstairs. He went back to his side of the fence. He sat on the terrace. He waited. He was, it turned out, very good at waiting, when the thing he was waiting for was the only thing that mattered. She thought for 2 days. Not 2 days of distance. Dorian was still there, still on the other side of the fence, still present in the way that he had become, quietly and without announcement, present. The children still found him. Zoe still talked at him across the gate with the absolute confidence of someone who had made up her mind about a person and saw no reason to revise it. Eli still watched him with those careful eyes and, on the second afternoon, showed up at his terrace door with a notebook and asked if he wanted to see something. Dorian sat on the terrace steps with Eli for 40 minutes looking at a notebook full of meticulous pencil drawings, birds, mostly, rendered with a precision that was remarkable and a care that was even more so. He said very little. He looked at each one. He asked 2 questions, both of which Eli answered with the pleased seriousness of someone who has finally been asked the right thing. When Eli left, Dorian sat for a long time with his hands folded, looking at nothing. Naledi watched from the kitchen window. She had been watching a great deal over the past 2 days. Not looking for reasons. She had enough reasons. She had been sitting with the thing she had been sitting with since the night of the word that broke them open, waiting for it to settle into something she could hold clearly. It had settled. She had 2 questions. The first was, did she believe him? Not about the practicalities, she would verify those, she was not a person who took structural claims on faith. But about the essential thing. About whether the man who had sat across from her at her kitchen table at 6 in the morning and said I will stand in front of that was the man he was presenting himself to be, or a version assembled for the purpose. She believed him. She believed him for reasons that had nothing to do with what he had said and everything to do with what she had watched. A man who performs care does not turn his phone over during a child's sentence. Does not miss a meeting worth millions. Does not lose an argument about bridges to a 6-year-old with the specific quality of engagement that means you are genuinely learning something. Does not sit on terrace steps for 40 minutes looking at pencil drawings and understand that silence is what is needed. He had not been performing. The second question was harder. The second question was, could she do this? Could she take the architecture she had built over 6 years? The life that was hers, that she had constructed carefully and owned completely, and choose to let another person into the foundation of it? Not above it, not beside it in the managed way of people who keep their lives separate, but into it. Into the actual structure. She thought about her children. She thought about Zoe, who had already, without asking permission, assigned him a place in her world. She thought about what that place deserved. Someone who would stay in it, who would not retreat from it when it became inconvenient, who would grow into it the way people grow into things that matter. She thought about Eli, who had taken him the notebook. The notebook was not a small thing. The notebook was Eli's interior. The notebook was the thing Eli showed to people he had decided were safe. He had decided. She thought, finally, about herself. About the woman she had become over these 6 years. Not despite what she had carried, but partly through it. She was not who she had been at that summit. She was someone who had built something from nothing and found that the building had changed her into a